This Lee Loadmaster, as you see it right here, is capable of putting out 1,000 rounds an hour. Stay tuned over the next couple of videos and I'll show you how to get it set up on your bench, how to get your dies set up, and start loading. Now your Lee Loadmaster should have come set up from the factory, but let's go over all the parts so that you understand what they are and how to assemble them. First of all, you should have the appropriate priming assembly. If it's small primer, the last that I knew, it should be colored black. If you have the large primer assembly, it should be red. If it's anything other than red, there were difficulties with priming systems and sometimes the primers would flip over. Contact the factory and they'll ship you a new one free of charge. And you may have either the perfect powder measure, which is for larger cases such as rifle cases, or the disc system, which is typically used for pistol cases. If at all possible to use the disc system, you can use the double disc system and it will work perfectly with cases up to 308. The Lee Perfect does have a tendency to leak, and with certain ball powders you'll be raining ball powder down onto your Lee Loadmaster and creates quite havoc. So moving on, you need a shell catcher bracket with 2 pan head screws to mount it. You need to have this is the assembly that moves your cases along from from the chute tube. You need to have a primer. You need to have a primer ram with the spring. Be sure not to lose that spring. And this comes in small or large primers as well. You need to have a bead chain with a shock spring and an adjuster. Need to have the case ejector, and with that goes also the O-ring. There's a neoprene O-ring and the nut that holds it down, and this has a recess on the underside. This is your shell positioner. This is what moves your shells into position onto your shell holder. You make sure you have your turret for each caliber that you wish to load, because if you're switching off from one caliber to another, you really don't want to have to adjust your dies each time. These are inexpensive enough. Now moving along down here, we have the Sho Holder, and this is also for the appropriate size rim. Be sure to consult your chart if you need to have any other calibers. There are naturally, some of these Sho Holders will fit many different size rims. Today I'm going to be loading the 45 ACP, and the 45 ACP has the same rim dimensions as the 308 or the 3006. This device here is the indexer, and make sure that you have one of those. You need to have the case feed rod. I suggest that you have a 7/16 wrench, box, or open end. A Phillips head screwdriver is a handy thing to have. You'll need that. Now, although your dies are only going to come with 4 dies if you're doing pistols, and with rifles it's a different setup entirely, but we're doing pistols today, so we'll stick with that without causing any confusion. But I strongly recommend that whether you're doing rifles or pistols, that you get yourself a universal decapping die for each of your turrets, and there's a reason for that, and I'll show you why. But if you don't have one right now, I'll wait for you to come back. Just kidding. But get one of those. That'll fill up all the holes. And what you'll do is you will move. This is your resizing die, whether it's pistol or rifle. You will move your decapping pin station to position number 1, and your resizing die will act as a shell plate positioner. This will help ensure that your primers are seating directly in line with the primer pocket. It just makes things a lot more accurate. You'll need to have, along with your dies, you'll have a case beveling die, and it'll come with a nut on the top perhaps, but I want you to replace that with a riser. The riser will allow your powder charger to be lifted up above all these other dies. You can piggyback these as high as you need to if they're in the way. Then, moving along, here's your bullet seating die, and finally your factory crimp die. This is, as far as I'm concerned, this is the only way to go. The factory crimp die, especially with straight-sided cases that head space on the case mouth, this actually post-sizes the case. In other words, it squeezes the entire case down to the exact original dimensions, and it fits the case around the bullet, and it makes for absolutely good tight fit for your bullet. And finally, you have the case feeder. You can also get the tray that goes on top here, which will shake them down into position. You know, I don't get that involved with production, so it's of no consequence to me to just simply drop them in one at a time. It takes a couple of minutes to do, but it's no big deal. But they're cheap enough. And here's your case catcher. And so let's begin showing you how to set this all up. Now, I have been using this machine for over 6 years, using it continuously with many thousands of rounds. And I can tell you that incorrect lubrication will bring this machine to a complete and utter stop, and it'll give you nothing but frustrations. I'm going to show you all the places to lubricate and how to lubricate. Please don't go beyond that, and don't use any products other than the ones that I specify. They're simply, it's not a complicated process, but don't make life difficult for you by over lubricating. The first thing you should do, if you've got an old machine and it's already been used, I want you to clean out inside here with mineral spirits. Clean everything out well, dump your primers out and begin afresh. Especially down in the primer ram area. You want to make sure that this area right here is cleaned out thoroughly. After you get done cleaning it out with Q-tips and mineral spirits, follow up by using alcohol to get any residue of oil and mineral spirits out of there. You want it completely dry. And the reason why is because there's nothing in here that's a moving component. There are no friction areas in here whatsoever. And you want to be very, very sure that all debris falls to the bottom without collecting up here and getting involved with your spindle. If this spindle begins to transfer and pick up dirt, it'll start transferring to your shell plate, and then your shell plate will start bogging down, and that's the end of your loading experience. So clean up very well. Clean up around this round section right here, because that's your bearing surface, and clean up entirely around the primer area, the primer ram area. That is extremely important because you don't want to have any grease and oil in there. I will show you exactly where you do want to oil there, and it has nothing to do with the ram. It has to do with the, I should say, the pivot point. It has to do with the ram itself. This is your primer ram with the spring, and this is the saddle for it right here, this groove. Just inside that groove, place just a very small smear of grease, just plain standard axle grease that comes in a tube, and don't go buying any special formulation or anything. This ram has been going up and down for thousands of rounds, and there's absolutely no wear in here whatsoever. So it's nothing to fret. Do not do not grease the outside of it. The outside of it cannot, if you grease the outside of it, grease will migrate up to your primer seating area, and it'll start catching primers and flipping them over and all those other things that people have horrors with. This right here is the area that you want to grease. And just the smallest dab right down here in the bottom with a toothpick, and that's the end of it. Don't go beyond that. Don't grease anything more, and don't labor over it. It's a very simple thing. That's just the pressure point for the ram toggle. Now you notice that I have the spring hole to the rear of the machine. Just simply set that down on top of that pivot and right over the saddle. You might need to drop your ram down so you have clearance. This is one of the only fussy details, but once you've got it in place and that spring is situated, you're good to go. I'll remove the turret securing thumb nut so you can see this detail right here. This bolt right here, this bolt head, is the contact point for the other end of the primer, for the primer engagement. All you do is place one smear with your finger of grease on that bolt head, just one, and don't go beyond that. There's very little need to, rather than using a lot, just on occasion, redress it. But you don't want to use a lot of grease and gunk on there, because it's just going to collect dirt and it's not going to serve any lubrication purpose. Now I recommend that you go to Napa or Tractor Supply or Walmart and just get a small hand pump like this that uses the small tubes. You don't need to get an expensive grease gun. You can get these tubes of grease. They come 3 in a package for about $4.95, and that'll last you for many, many years. But with this standard grease gun, there are 3 fittings, Zerk fittings. There's one at the lower toggle, at this one here, and then in this one. And these are already greased, so I'm not going to go through the process again. This bottom one here, this bottom link is just a friction axle. It's not held in place. So when you remove your grease gun, be sure you don't pull the pin out. And that pin doesn't move anywhere. It'll stay there for many thousands of strokes without sliding sideways. But just turn your grease gun nozzle to the side and it'll come right out. And the next point of lubrication that's very important is right here. There's a small ball bearing. You want to take the ball bearing tip of a standard oil can, and with motor oil, and you don't have to go out and buy expensive synthetic motor oil or anything like that, but just with standard motor oil, just squeeze a little bit in, work your press ram. It's going to feel as if you're not getting any oil in there, but trust me, you will be. You'll notice that oil will begin to accumulate on your ram, and that's the sign that everything is going just ducky. Right now, you can see that there's oil building up along the side of the ram, and that's sufficient. You can do that every now and then, every few times you're loading, and that will ensure that you have plenty of lubrication in the ram. This is a very, very slick machine. There's no friction whatsoever, and there's no play, there's no wiggle. That entire ram is very, very heavy, and it's a very good setup. And if I may follow up about that lubrication point, the manufacturer specifically says do not use WD-40 to lubricate this ram. It does not have enough. It does not have enough protection and lubrication and cushioning for those surfaces. So be sure you use motor oil. Just standard any kind of motor oil that you happen to have around. It doesn't have to be any particular formulation. Now bringing the ram to the full up position, right here with the primer adjustment bolt. Be sure you have approximately a 32nd of an inch of clearance between the primer seating mechanism and the bolt. If you just got your machine from the factory, or if you've been using it and your primers are set up so that they're seating flush, and without over seating them, crushing them, you're good to go. Backing this bolt out will seat the primers more deeply, and screwing it in other words toward the machine, will make sure that they seat less tightly into your cases. These are quarter 20 threads. They're very, very coarse, so it takes a very, very small turn of this bolt to affect a significant change in the seating depth of your primers. I'm not going to place the shell positioner on at this time. I'm going to set up the turret and get all your dies going and get things coordinated before we start feeding cases. But make sure that this surface is absolutely grease-free. Many people have been putting oil and grease on this. There's absolutely no need whatsoever. This is a plastic. Basically it's a glass polymer part. There's no friction involved, and the surface is very smooth. This has run for thousands of trips back and forth here. The great problem is that right here is where your case will set. Your cases will drop down on here. If you have grease and oil, it's going to pick up that grease and oil. It's going to get into your primer situation, and the next thing you know, you're transferring grease and oil all around to your shell plate, and you're picking up stray powder, primer residue, dust from spent primers and everything else, and you're going to have a horror show. Keep this clean. Make sure that you wipe it up before we begin. Make sure that you clean this up very carefully with some mineral spirits followed up by alcohol. Okay, now this is your shell plate indexer. This is what turns, this device right here is what turns your shell plate. You have to get familiar with one particular aspect of it. There is on the back of it, this is the rear side of the flipper. You can see there's a fin here. On the back side, take note and make sure that you have a bright bevel right here. This is a very small, it's not a very heavy bevel, but it's just this spot right here. Make sure that the bright bevel side is on this side right here. Now, you're going to take just your finger and wipe grease on all four sides of this shaft, and on the front face of it down here, but just as I say, just enough that you smear it on with your fingers. That's more than sufficient grease for this. This, again, rather than putting on too much and having it get everywhere, you can occasionally just simply slide this out and re-grease it if it's starting to bind. But don't over-grease it, and this is one of those things where less is more. And on the flipper side, on the front face of the flipper, just put a little bit, just a little dab on the upper side and the lower side, and set that to one side. Here's your shell plate. At all times when you're dealing with this, think clean. Clean and oil-free. Don't get oil and grease involved with this, except just as I'll show you right now. You want to take just a small dab of grease. That's enough right there. And on the inside, where the spindle contacts the shell plate, just run it around, and also wipe it around these studs. If it looks like I'm not putting enough on, believe me, that's more than enough. Again, this will start picking up all kinds of nuisance material very quickly and bog down your machine. Once you've got those surfaces greased, you're good to go. That's all you need. Set that aside. Now, there have been various issues in the past that Lee worked very hard on to correct, and this is the large priming mechanism that is used now. It's color-coded red, and if you don't have a red one, be sure you contact them and they will replace it at no cost. This one here, it works perfectly. I've been using this one for nearly 3 years, I believe now, and done many hundreds of rounds, and it never flipped a primer yet. So make sure you move this flipper inboard so that it's basically out of the way. Raise your ram a little bit so you have some room to work, and we're going to seat this down on top in that recess. Be sure don't catch the spring and press it over and bend it. Once you corrupt that spring, you need to get a new one. Now right here you'll see a red tab. That red tab has to clear this hump on the machine, on the ram. So press that down out of the way and just seat this fully. Once you've got that seated all the way to the bottom, then we're going to put the shelf plate on. Return this flipper back to its outboard position to give clearance, and drop the shelf plate in. You don't install the indexer until you have everything set up. Make sure that it's down flush here so that your the shaft is fully engaged with the shelf plate, and it should spin freely. Next goes your shell ejector. There's a top and bottom to this. The bottom, where this little flipper protrudes, you want to be sure that this engagement point right here is down. Seat it straight over onto the square shaft with the ejector facing you. All right. So in other words, this tab right here will go down into each of these indexing holes. Next, place your O-ring on top of that, and place the nut with the recessed side down. Be sure that that's down so that that recess is over the O-ring. Secure it all the way down snugly, and then just loosen it just a bit, just to take excess pressure off. Now each of these flipper screws right here have got a special cupped washer underneath. The cup must face down. In other words, the convex side should be facing upward, and the washer should be directly under the head of the screw. Just simply tighten those down, not over tight. You just want to have enough. You want to have enough slack so that whenever you need to, you should be able to reach in with your fingernail and open them up, because from time to time you're going to want to open those up to release the shell. Each of those flippers should be positioned inboard now. Use your finger to engage the shell plate all around. Now I'm going to take a case of the right size and, placing it into the first position, just rotate it around with my fingers and make sure that I open up those flippers. Once those flippers clear that shell case, they're automatically adjusted to the right dimension. Those will retain, the whole purpose of those is to retain the shell in place as it goes around from station to station, and then finally you can see here ejects it. Now there are 5 stations on this turret. You don't have to use all 5. You can leave the second stage open, but as I said before when I began, I highly recommend that you get yourself a universal decapping die. This die does no sizing operation whatsoever, but this die will be positioned in station number 1. First thing you want to do is make sure that your holes are lined up looking down from the top, and your holes are positioned over each of the stations. Then tighten down your set screw, your thumb screw, and you never use any pliers or anything like that defaces these parts. Nothing's going to move. Just use your finger tightness, and that'll stay forever. Before you begin, back off all of your lock rings all the way to the top of the threads, and place these. And you should be sure also to, if you've got new dies or even dies that have been used for some time, clean them in mineral spirits. Mineral spirits, not mineral oil. Mineral spirits will clean up the dies, follow it up by just some alcohol, and that'll keep them nice and clean, and they'll run perfectly. All right, run your ram all the way to the top. Run the ram all the way to the top. Hold the handle down, because otherwise, as you apply pressure with the die, the ram will float. It'll start dropping the ram down by itself. So hold the handle down and screw it all the way down to where it has just firm contact, and then tighten down your. You notice I did not use any pliers or anything like that. It's absolutely unnecessary. Just simply turn it down finger tight with down to the Sho Holder, and then tighten down your lock ring. Then you move on to the next die, and you'll notice that this one here now, be sure that you remove your decapping pin. This is a naked die now. This is only going to be used for resizing, and this has got a carbide. This has got a carbide ring right here, which sizes without any lubrication. Do not use case lubrication when you're using carbide dies. It's absolutely unnecessary, and it will do nothing to help the die whatsoever. Carbide is extremely slippery, and it works flawlessly on brass or nickel cases, and it won't cause any friction. This is the slickest system you can have. You paid a lot of money for these carbide dies. The reason why you can't use carbide dies on bottleneck cases is simply because it can only be cast into a ring, and it can't be used on a heavily tapered case. Again, run your threads all the way to the top of the die. To start out, hold your handle down, turn the die in until it contacts the Sho Holder. You don't want to put pressure on the Sho Holder. It's not necessary. It's only a gauge. So once you've contacted the Sho Holder, then simply use your fingers to tighten the lock ring down. And again, don't use a wrench on these lock rings. These lock rings are provided with a beautiful, nicely engineered recess with a O-ring that keeps them secured forever. There's no vibration that's going to loosen that up under any circumstances. Then you move right along to the next one, and backing out my lock ring, I want to put in the powder charging die. Be sure that you have your expanding. This one here happens to be a little bit of dirt on it, so I'll clean it up. And it doesn't hurt to put just a very small amount of grease on the shaft of just the larger size of the shaft, the larger OD. Do not put it on the inside by any means, because you're going to end up catching powder. Keep the inside absolutely clean. You don't want to have powder hanging up inside this at all. Now let me explain the operation of this expanding die in detail. This inside mechanism right here where the powder flows through is designed to expand and bell the mouth of the case to allow for bullet insertion at the next station. What we're going to do is use a bullet that you will be planning to load, and use that as a gauge to make sure that you have sufficient but not excessive amount of belling. This is perfect. In other words, the bullet can be inserted with my finger and with complete clearance, but I don't want to have a large gap around the side here, which indicates overflaring. If you have an overflaring situation, it's going to cause two different situations that you don't want. First of all, being that the next die is going to catch that overly flared rim, and it will bend. It'll chip or bend your cases. Sometimes it will collapse the cases. You don't want to have that interference. So that's the first reason. Secondly, for the life of your cases, brass has a tendency to what's called work harden. The more you work brass, the harder and more brittle it becomes. This end of the brass is intended to be relatively soft in order to seal gases from coming back alongside the case, and it also is to provide good bullet grip. A case which becomes too tough and too hard, it loses its elasticity and it won't grip the bullet correctly. So just That's the correct amount of flare that we're looking for once we have that die adjusted. So let's go on to seating that die and getting it adjusted that way. Move the flipper away on this 10 o'clock position right here. This is the third station, and place a good shell right in that. Close it up, and be sure that you are in the correct index position. It should be concentric with this top hole right here. Run the case all the way up to where the case is looking right through the hole. Screw your die down on top of it. Now just turn it in part way, and now insert your riser on top, also with the piggyback adapter, and that just simply inserts down in. Make sure you have your O-ring in position here and secure that. Those should be tightened together as one unit. Now what we need to do is put your powder measure on top in order to make the next adjustment. If you don't have one of these, I strongly recommend that you get one. This adapter right here allows you to thread your powder measure on without having to spin it all the way around. Now thread the powder measure onto your riser all the way down. Now notice that I don't have my die all the way in position yet. I just want to have my riser and the powder measure all screwed together as one unit. Now I just simply turn this die down until I see the actuator that moves. This actuator that you can see inside here, that has to be moved all the way over to the dump position. I've removed that so you can see what's going on, and I just simply turn the whole unit down on top of the case until I feel resistance. Normally I wouldn't spin the entire powder measure around, but now I can feel resistance. This is the point where I start to check using a virgin case that has not been belled and make sure that I am belling the case sufficiently. So I'm at the same time checking to make sure that my actuator needs to come all the way over in order to dump, and it does. The actuator should be coming over adjacent to the hole, and that makes sure that the powder will dump completely. It doesn't need to come over any farther than that. If you come over farther than that, it's going to begin to bind up. Now take a disc and set it on top to make sure that you have absolute straight through clearance looking through. The one with the largest hole is 1.57 cc's. Use that one to align with, and place the actuator into this square, this oblong hole, which is adjacent to the, in fact it should say 157 right on top of it. Place that on top, and I should be able to look down all the way through and see I should be able to see the complete charging of powder without any shelf there. So turn it until I've achieved that, which I have right now, and you can go slightly beyond, and that will make sure that your case mouth is belled. Now this will require further adjustment later on as you actually are running cases around, but for the time being, tighten down your lock ring. That's your preliminary adjustment for that die. Now you can remove this, and if you want you can take this out of the way. Now here's your bullet seating die. Move your seating stem back it off so you can see the threads begin to show, and index your test case to the center of this station and run your die in. Hold the ram down so that it stays fully up, and turn this down until you feel the resistance of the case. Make sure that it's not just a burr in the thread, but when you feel the resistance of the case, back it off a quarter of a turn and then tighten down your lock. Remember, you have to have a case in that position as you make that adjustment. And this, my friends, is another expensive carbide die. This is a post-forming die. In other words, this after the case has all been after the cartridge has all been assembled, this die will squeeze the entire case down to factory dimensions and basically form it and fit it around the bullet. So with the ram all the way down, remaining in that position and holding it down, just simply turn this down to the bottom position, back off my lock ring so I know that I'm fully engaged with the Sho Holder, and that's it. Don't force that die down onto the Sho Holder. There's no need to. That again, it's just a gauge. Now once I've got the lock ring tightened fully with my fingers, I should be good to go. Now just simply move your handle all the way up and down to make sure you have good clearance, and we'll move on and install the indexer. Now move the ram all the way up again. Now I want to absolutely stress this. At no time should you ever feel resistance when you're moving this ram up and down. It should be a very smooth, clean stop with no sponginess or buckling or anything like that. If you feel any kind of resistance whatsoever, stop absolutely at once and relieve all tension, and check what's going on. 9 times out of 10, your decapping pin is striking the shell plate. Make sure you're indexed. And never make half moves. Now, your indexer, remember, has a large fin and it has a small fin. The large fin with the rib on it is your upper position. At the underside of your shell ejector, right here, your shell chute, cartridge chute, there is a square hole. Locate that square hole underneath and slide the indexer in with your fingers until it comes to a stop. It should find its way in between the studs on the back of that Sho Holder. If it doesn't, just simply lower the ram and it'll find its way in. Just press, and then you'll notice as it comes down, it travels along that waffling. That's not just for decoration and for strength. That's also the indexing mechanism. Very slick. Watch this flipper right here as it follows along that track. And that's why you lubricated that with a little bit of grease, nothing more. Don't be putting all kinds of grease everywhere. It's not going to help you a bit. This is Delrin plastic. It doesn't even need any grease at all, but it does make things run a little bit smoother if it has just a smear of grease on it. And every now and then you can just simply slide that out and clean it off and reapply just a finger dab of fresh grease once in a great while, and that's all it needs. So run it around using a case. Place a case in the first station and just simply run a test. You go around from station to station. You should feel the resizing operation. Then you should also, now we're watching up above, before we engage that station, your press came with a bead chain, a shock spring, and one of these adjusters right here. Move your adjuster to a position which leaves about 1.5 inches or 2 inches or so of chain hanging out from the bottom freely, and place your adjuster right there. And that gives a little bit of ballast. That adds weight so that the chain feeds back down through the lower portion of your press. Right down here on the top of your ram, there's a hole on the side here. Pass it up through. Now, through the outboard side hole, pass your chain. Relieve some tension on your press so you can pass it back out through the other side. Now be very, very careful. The pressure of this ram can very easily snap this chain and you'll be to the hardware store buying a new one. You should have no slack. Just simply adjust it until you have no slack, and it returns this lever all the way to the down position. It doesn't need to be tight. One bead looser than spring tight. You don't want to have that spring pulling. That spring is mostly for ballast. So now run the case up into that station and observe this actuator right here. The actuator should be swinging over fully. Again, take your disc and place your disc on top with the 157 position station and look down. Now, without manipulating it with your hand, you want to check and make sure that it goes all the way over that hole. Look down through, physically look down through and make sure that there's no shelf there, because you don't want to have powder catching on the edge of this tray. So you want to have it pass completely over. Once it does, next thing is to watch it go all the way back. It should, the chain should slide that all the way back to the fully open position where it will dump more powder. Continue around to the next station. This is your bullet seating station. Again, this is just a dummy case. We're just running this around just to check the indexing, and finally your post sizing die, and that returns the case to its original dimension. And you should be able to examine that case and see that in fact it was resized back to a nice straight case. Do it one more time, completely all the way around, once or twice, to make sure that everything lines up and that your powder charging system is working correctly. First station, next station. Don't slam. Everything should be a nice, smooth operation. If you want to use speed, develop it during the middle of the stroke and not at the end or the beginning. And that's all there is to it. Now I've saved this portion for last, even though it's listed as one of the first things to do in the owner's manual. As you can see, all the things that we did left us free and clear not to have to worry about shell feeding. Right now though, you want to back this lock nut off and just check and see if your adjustment allows for about 1/4 of an inch. You can see right in here, I've got about 1/4 of an inch of thread exposed right here. And if I count the threads, I have exposed 1, 2, 3. There's 4 threads exposed, if that gives you any idea as to where to start. And the top hole should be the outboard hole. This is a slanted hole that comes out on the other side, on the inboard side. So you want to have the top hole facing in this angle. It should be angled in this direction right here. You want to take this toggle link mechanism, and this needs to slide down onto the shaft, and there's friction here. Do not, absolutely do not place any lubricant or any oil on there. There must be friction here. If there's no friction here, the system will not work. It's designed to work with friction. It has to have friction, otherwise it will not position your cases. If it slides up and down freely, you're not going to feed cases, and you're going to have a lot of problems. You're going to have cases colliding. They're not going to feed correctly. With the track down and the toggle link on the top side of the square shaft, insert that into this hole here and just simply place that mechanism onto your ram. What I'd like to do is raise the ram a little bit and slide it on, and that will allow you to slide the shaft into position. That's all there is to it. Once you've got that slid into position, now you want to take a pencil and measure the distance between the square shaft and the feed plate. This feed plate right here and the square shaft should have approximately 7/16 of an inch clearance, which happens to be the same distance as the 2 flats of a pencil. So just simply turn, rotate this into position, and tighten this screw down here when you're satisfied, making sure that you keep these squares, these square portions, flat and perpendicular. Make sure that they're square and not turned edgewise, so that you have good, clean operation. With that positioned and the spacing adjusted, you make the adjustment, your spacing adjustment down here with this nut. If you need to move it over, just simply loosen the nut and move that square shaft over and make your final adjustment. Now just run this a few times and observe how it operates and why that friction is important. any adjustments to that, if it's too tight here, loosen the bottom screw. Leave the top screw tight and loosen the bottom screw so that you don't have excess tightness. It's just sufficient so that you can see that pulling on the linkage. The reason for that tightness, you can see right here. If it wasn't tight, this would simply drop down on its own and it wouldn't allow this to pull to the rear. So that friction is absolutely essential, and that's why you don't want to lubricate it. So there should be no lubrication involved with anything. You don't want to be contaminating cases before they go into your loading operation. Once you've established that, simply place a case. When it's in this position here is when it picks up a new case. This is when it drops a new case down, so simply manually place a case right here and watch it feed in. It has not yet fed a case in. What we want to be very careful of is that we don't have cases colliding. This is where we make a final adjustment, if need be, to this bottom nut and move the square shaft in toward the press or away from the press as need be. But now you can see as I was pulling the handle down, it moved the case into the shell holder. Now I'm continuing around. I'm dropping a new case. I don't want to feed it manually, just drop a new case onto that plate and make sure now that your cases do not collide. You can see right here as they come together, there should be no collision of cases. The first case should be moving away before the other case is even near the shell holder. That's essential. Now, at this point, this case has not yet arrived at the shell holder, but will be positioned on the downward stroke. And you can run a series of cases just to try that. Just keep on putting new cases on. Watching, make sure they don't collide, and make sure that they seat onto the shell holder fully. Now you can see what we need to do for the next operation is to install our case catcher. If you are colliding cases, move that shaft away, and if they're not seating into the shell holder, then move it one turn toward. Right now we have absolutely perfect operation. I've run through a whole plate of cases, and we're ready to go. The bracket is simply positioned with the bottom of the flange toward the wall and the vertical toward you, and have the back edge of the flange of this angle iron adjacent to the back tab of your press. So it can be resting anywhere between 1/8 of an inch to touching the press is fine, but make sure that it's positioned parallel with your bench, and you can draw a straight edge line, or you can simply line it up by eyeball. But you can look down from above and line it up with your feed plate, and that should be sufficient. Slip your shell catcher on top of the thing, and make sure you bring it up close to your trough, so that you have good spillage and they don't get hung up in between or fall below. And just simply check it out, make sure you have clearance here. Now the next operation is to install our case feed mechanism. Your case feeder has two nuts. Remove the bottom one. The top one you want to position, for now, position it about a 1/2 inch or so away from the feeder, and insert this stud right into this hole right here, adjacent to your feeder, and run the nut up. Be sure to turn this now so that you have clearance. This has got to clear the edge of your turret. Have at least an 1/8 of an inch of clearance, but look down and you should be able to turn this and line it up so that this feed hole right here is directly in line with the top of your shell plate. With this adjustment right here, run this turret down to within an 1/8 or so, between an 1/8 of an inch and a 1/4 of an inch of clearance between the feeder and the turret, and then tighten your lock ring. This is a preliminary adjustment, and we'll be checking it with the feeding of the cases in a moment before we tighten this all the way down. Just simply snug it down finger tight so that it won't move around, and then we're going to run some cases through it as we did before, this time through the tube. So fill the tube up, and you know, you can get the shaker tray that goes on top, and I used that for many years with a Hulme, Hulme case feeder on a Star universal press for many operations. But you know, it didn't take me that long to fill that tube about halfway up. So whether you want to bother with it or not, it's up to you. Our goal right now is to see how this feeds, and it should run everything nice and smoothly. Watch and see. What we're watching for now is to make sure that the cases drop smoothly onto the feed plate. With the next case, it shouldn't buckle any cases up inside here. There should be clearance. The next case should not interfere with the first case. They should never at any time contact one another and cause any interference. If there's any interference, move this shaft away from the press by loosening up the lock nut and backing it off one turn at a time until you have full clearance. And the other objective is to make sure that your cases are feeding all the way into the shell holder so that they don't jam up. Now we're going to start to see cases coming out. Speed is not necessary. Right now I'm running at 1200 rounds per hour. If that's not fast enough for you, I don't know what would be. Speed is not important. This is a very, very nice, smooth case. I'll be very surprised if anybody can feed bullets any faster than this. You can get a bullet feeder that will do just that. It will feed the bullets in from the left-hand side automatically, and that can speed things up. But if you manually feed them, you're still going to be getting over 900 rounds per hour. So there you go. We've got the machine set up. It's ready to run. All adjustments are made. The dies are ready to start pouring out ammunition. In the next section of the video, I'll show you how to set up your powder charges and get those adjusted properly for your and to pick out the correct load. So until we meet again, God bless.